So thanks very much for the introduction, and I hope everyone's had an interesting morning so far. Very briefly about myself, I'm not actually from a clinical background. My background is from high performance sport. I studied sports psychology and leadership at university. Spent a number of years working in performance psychology, looking at sport. I've spent a lot of time working in education. I've done various things in the corporate environment, and I've spent the last 5 or 6 years looking at performance in healthcare. Quick show of hands, how many of you here work, healthcare professionals working either in the NHS or private providers? Okay, so good for you. How many of you have come across the term human factors? I wonder if we asked you all what it means, whether you'd all give me the same answer. That's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So why has it become such a big buzz term in healthcare today? Well, put simply, because of the number of what we get termed avoidable incidents. So the American figures may seem a little bit sensationalist, but the figures in the NHS suggest 150 deaths a week that are avoidable. We can debate how you categorise something as avoidable. Commonly cited thing is that medical error is cited as the third leading cause of death in the USA. I'm sure many of you have heard of the tragic death of Jack Adcock, which led to the prosecution of Dr. Hadiza Bawa-Garba, which is a case that's still ongoing. And I suspect some of you here know of the case of Elaine Bromley. So the death of a healthy young woman in 2005 following an attempted sinus operation. Her husband at the time, Martin, has spent the last 13 years campaigning for patient safety. I find him a very inspirational chap. He's been given an MBE recently, and I think the thing that's so inspirational about that is his message that it's about learning, not blame. I suspect when you look at these cases, in the vast majority, it wasn't intent. No one set out to do it. Okay, you get the odd Harold Shipman, but that's very rare. It's not intent. People aren't incompetent. In the death of Elaine Bromley, 2 consultant anaesthetists and a consultant ENT surgeon. You couldn't have asked for more expertise, combined expertise of 100 years. How does that happen? Very often what happens is it gets termed human error. This term, human error, we haven't figured out what happened yet. The term human error doesn't mean anything in itself. This is where the term human factors springs up. The problem with this term is it means different things to different people. How many of you, when you saw the term human factors on the title of this talk, were sitting there thinking, I really hope he's not a pilot? Perhaps heard a little bit too much about commercial aviation. I feel I can say that because about 3 of my immediate family are pilots. I managed to, dodge a bullet or miss an opportunity, depends on your opinion of pilots really. But if you ask a pilot what human factors means, they'll talk about attitudes and behaviours and non-technical skills. They'll talk to you about whether you have this sort of environment at work or whether you have this sort of environment at work. So this is the sort of stuff that they'll talk about. They'll talk about situation awareness and personality types and decision making and communication and leadership and teamwork and all of that kind of good stuff. And I'm sure we look at that and go, yeah, I'm sure that influences performance. Interestingly, if you talk to someone who's studied human factors at university, someone who's done a master's in human factors and ergonomics, they'll say, no, actually, it's about design. It's not about behaviour. So if you go and do an academic study, they'll say the adoption of human factors in aviation is about the design of air traffic control systems, the design of flight decks and interiors. So if you talk to someone from the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, they will tell you very clearly that human factors is not about behaviour, it's about design. Designing for people. So they'll talk about things like this. They'll talk about equipment and systems and engineering and ergonomics and designing the workspace, the interface with technology. Don't try and change behaviour to compensate for a poorly designed system, they'll tell you. Well, although I find it interesting, we go back to the Chartered Institute. On one page of their website, human factors is about design, it's not about behaviour. And at the bottom of the same page, examples of how human factors has influenced healthcare. And they'll talk about how Great Ormond Street learned from Formula One teams how to improve teamwork and communication. I think, hang on a second, unless I'm being really dim here, teamwork and communication is behavioural. So even within the Chartered Institute, they don't agree about what it is and isn't. So how on earth do we move forward? So, but I'm sure we'd all agree that that stuff is important, that it influences performance. Of course, if I talk to you guys, those of you at the front line, actually human factors, you might think about health and well-being. Does that feel familiar to some of you? Right, a lot of days. So what about this stuff? Stress, workload, how we deal with pressure, resilience, do we get breaks? How well we look after people's physical and mental health, nutrition, fatigue, motivation and morale. I'm sure we'd all agree these things are really important. And ultimately, one of the problems we have at the moment is this debate about definition, what is and isn't human factors, prevents us from actually moving forward. If I had my way, we would stop using the term altogether and we would just talk about performance. We'd talk about performance science. But we're stuck with the term for now. Performance is due to behaviour. Whatever way you slice it, what you do is what you get. Right? So if you change behaviour, you change performance. Now, of course, skills and attitudes dictate behaviour. Now, I can't go back to your workplace tomorrow and do your job because I don't have the skills and knowledge that you have to do that job. So your specific skills and knowledge are important. Your attitudes towards processes, right? So you can have the best checklist in the world, but if you don't think it's a good idea, or if you don't understand it, you either don't use it properly or you tick the boxes absent-mindedly and you don't really pay attention, so it doesn't work. So your attitudes are important. And then non-technical skills. Do you have the skills to play nicely with others? So that's important as well. So that's all the behavioural stuff. But what about the system, the processes that sit underneath that, the rules, the guidelines? Does it ever feel that rules and guidelines make your life more difficult? Does it ever feel impossible to comply with all of them? Do you ever have to make decisions between patient safety and following a guideline? So that obviously is important. Then the systems, the interface with technology, the environment around you, is that set up in a way that helps you succeed or sets you up to fail? What sits underneath this? The health and well-being. So, because if people are physically or mentally not capable of doing the task, if they're fatigued, their risk of making a mistake is high. If that's their limiting factor, there's no point working further up. And of course, the thing that sits down here, culture. So I turn up to work as a fresh-faced junior doctor, and then in my induction, someone says, Ben, if you have a concern about a patient and it's in the middle of the night, make sure you call the on-call consultant. And over the next few months, I hear mutterings among my colleagues that, oh, don't phone the consultant at 2 in the morning. You won't be here next week. If I hear that from my colleagues, it may never happen to me. That's part of the culture. That's going to influence my behaviour. Behaviour breeds culture and culture breeds behaviour, and everything else sits in between. This isn't really a strict hierarchy. However, what you tend to find, if the problem is further down and you try and work further up, you end up with problems. So if the problem is cultural and about health, and you try and work up here, you tend to have limited impact. So what we have to think about is where are our limiting factors? And of course, the influence, the size of the influence of each of these piece on overall performance varies on the environment we're in. So I want to give you a quick example. Can you read that? Just according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in the word are. The only important thing is the first. That's not English, that's gibberish. Now you're able to read that because your brain is an amazing pattern matching machine. Imagine if you had to consciously process every piece of information your brain ever received. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. Imagine this given moment your brain has to consciously process every piece of that information. You would be a gibbering wreck, you couldn't get through the day, so the brain develops this capacity to process in automatic mode, we sometimes say on autopilot. So you get through the day. Have you ever got home at the end of a working day and someone says, how was your journey? You have to say, I have no idea. I don't remember. Right, the brain is amazing, and what it does is it takes little nuggets of information and it fills in the blanks. And it does this without you even realising. In the context of reading, it takes in the first and last letter and it fills in the blanks. So you get this picture in your mind's eye, even if you haven't consciously processed it. Now, what have I just flashed up on the screen a couple of times? The cat sat on the mat. Did everyone see that? Right, that's on the screen for a fraction of a second, yet your brain was able to take in a few nuggets of information and fill in the blanks so you're able to see it. Fantastic. Just look at it again for me. What does it actually say? There's 2 does. Anyone see it first time round? It's same colour, same font, same shape. Why don't you see it? You don't see it because it doesn't fit the pattern. You have the English language stored in your long-term memory, right? Your long-term memory is amazing. So your brain takes in a few little nuggets of information that goes, what's the closest pattern I have to that? The cat sat on the mat, that makes sense. Well, that cat sat on the other mat, that doesn't make sense. So in a fraction of a second, your brain has deleted that without you even realising it. It's there, but you didn't see it. Of course, what we don't know yet, is that important? Does that matter? Most of what your brain filters out is unimportant, irrelevant information. Every now and again, the brain filters out something that's really important. Paradoxically, the more experienced you are, the more likely it is to happen, because the more your brain does stuff on automatic. So it's usually the newbie in the corner who sees stuff often because they're not on automatic and conscious mode. That's a whole other story. So this links us into a lot of things like drug errors. So just imagine every day for the last 5 years you've been to the shelf, the same shelf, and to get the ampicillin, and it's always looked like that, and you reach up there tomorrow and that's there. Can you imagine how easy it would be to pick up the wrong thing? We know there's loads of evidence that the brain sees shape, size and colour and it fills in the blanks. The brain pattern matches. So we have the drug error, right? We have an investigation from an incident. Someone got given amoxicillin when it should have been ampicillin. That's probably not the end of the world. I don't know, you know better than me. can be somewhat more serious. I've seen one with heparin and protamine before. Coagulant and anticoagulant, that's so much more serious. So what do we do? Well, we either blame the individual for getting it wrong, or we retrain them. You've got to go on the course that defines the difference between ampicillin and amoxicillin. Is that really what we need to do? Maybe we need to, of course, this is where the ergonomists, so we need to change the system. I know, we'll put amoxicillin in a red bottle, which would prevent that from happening. Of course, the issue here is you can almost certainly guarantee there's something else just over there in a red bottle. Like, realistically, the only way, you can't produce an error-proof system. You can't almost entirely design out error because, well, in the context of this, the only way of creating the perfect system is to make every drug look different or make every drug look totally the same. And with thousands on the market, that's just not feasible. So some of the behavioural stuff still matters. Double checks. Of course, double checks don't always work. That's usually because someone says, just confirm that's heparin for me. Yeah, you ever get that? How many times do you hear a leading question? Your brain's on automatic, I've just given you the answer, and you go, yeah. Not because you're stupid, not because you're incompetent, not because you're reckless, but because I've just put the answer in your mind. And now your brain has a pattern to latch onto. Whereas if someone says, just read that, the open-ended question forces the brain to consciously process what you've just heard. It sounds like a small pedantic difference. So often the combination of system change and behavioural change creates a reduction in risk of error. Now, I don't know how well you can see this because of the sort of screen, but the amount of emphasis we put on each component of performance varies in the environment you're in. So at this end, we have what we call ultra-safe environments. So this is where we have low levels of variation, high levels of choice, high levels of predictability. We can design layers of protection to protect operators. So this is stuff like commercial aviation, this is stuff like the nuclear industry, this is stuff like, in the healthcare industry, something like a blood transfusion or laboratory testing. But because of low levels of variation and high levels of control, we can almost entirely protect operators from error through design. So we put a lot of power to regulators and supervision. Training is mostly compliance with processes. So in commercial aviation, they have almost entirely designed out error. That's why it's so safe. So when you get on an airplane, your chance of being involved in an accident is about 1 in 17 million. Do you think we can apply that model to all of healthcare? Do you think we can design out error in most healthcare environments? So down this end, we have something like A&E on a Saturday night. The problem here is if we try to design out error, we remove the empowerment of judgment. And how many of you work in environments where there isn't often a clear-cut right and wrong decision? There isn't often a clear-cut best practice. You have to make a judgment based on professional expertise. And this is where the influence of socio-behavioural elements of performance, team working, things like that, become that much more important. They become that much bigger. And some things in healthcare, something like elective surgery probably fits somewhere in the middle. And healthcare is unique in that it's a whole collection of industries, it's not one industry. So you can't apply one model of safety across all of it. And you certainly can't apply the aviation model of safety to all of healthcare. I don't think we should throw away the learning, but I think we should move beyond perhaps looking at that model as a cut and paste, as a drag and drop. So, by the way, this is from a book called Safer Healthcare Strategies from the Real World. It's free online. I've got a hard copy because I like making notes in it, but it's free online. If you just look at the 3 contrasting models to safety. So we have to apply it appropriately. I also think we need a high-performance model of training and coaching. In the environments where behaviours and team working are a big component of performance, i.e. where you can't design the layers of redundancy in a system, and you're relying on the way people work together, should we necessarily be following the model from the people who are able to design it out? So all my pilot people, between them, have several hundred years of experience. None of them have ever had an emergency. Some of you are dealing with emergencies every day. You probably have more skills about how to deal with emergencies. We need a high-performance model. They call training in human factors in aviation CRM, crew resource management training. And a lot of them will say that it's a tick-box exercise. We talk about important stuff, but it's not taught well. We need a better approach, and actually the industry itself is moving away from CRM to something called evidence-based training. And interestingly, the guy who developed evidence-based training has said, all I'm suggesting is that we follow the same approach that a teacher would use. It's nothing new. It's better pedagogical approach. And this is, I thought, a really interesting quote. Few pilots will mourn the passing of the CRM training day. It's not that it's not talking about the right stuff, all this leadership and teamwork and communication. Now, I spent 3 years studying leadership at university. I felt I scratched the surface. And I've spent the last 15 years trying to understand it better. To be a CRM instructor in aviation, you do a 3-day CRM course, you do a 5-day instructor's course. You have no legal obligation to do any further training. You have grandfather rights to train that stuff to professionals at the front line. If that training's rubbish, it tends not to be exposed because the systems are so safe. And no one's going to suggest, you and I as a paying passenger are not going to suggest to an airline, look, make the systems slightly less safe so that the operators have to deal with emergencies slightly more often so they get better at dealing with it. No one would suggest that's a good idea. So the poor training will rarely be exposed. So we need to develop a way of training this stuff that is more suited to the environment that you're in. So this is why I believe that we should have a collaborative design of solutions with specialists in human performance, things like sports psychology and performance psychology. Most of the expertise in creating performance in dynamic environments is from fields like sports psychology. This is a whole discipline in itself. How do you create high performance in challenging circumstances? Qualified ergonomists, I think that is important. Experts in system design, leadership and team dynamics. I think we should learn from other risk professions. I think there's lots of useful learning from aviation, but there's lots of useful learning from the fire service, and lots of useful learning from the rail industry. And specialists in educational methodology. If you're trying to change behaviour, the people you should be talking to are coaches and teachers, because they're the people that do it for a living. And of course, this is important. This whole has to be collaboration with you. You're the experts in your work. We can't tell you how to do it. This has to be a collaborative effort. So to summarise then, human factors and performance science is scientific knowledge about our body, our mind, and our behaviour, how to understand our capabilities and our limitations, and therefore how we can design the best possible fit between people and their working environment, whether that be the software, the technology they interact with, whether it be the hardware, the physical environment they interact with, or the other people, the liveware they interact with. And here is the key point. The safety model must be contextually appropriate. The safety model for the operating theatre, for A&E, for community mental health, for any other aspect of healthcare need to be different. And yeah, maybe commercial aviation, the model there might kind of fit a little bit for some of those environments, but for most it won't. We need to design the model that's appropriate to that. So thanks very much for your attention. That's a very, very brief period of time talking about what is a very broad context. We're actually just across here at stand CO8. If any of you would like to talk about it a bit more, understand the approach we take to try to improve performance. Thanks very much. And here's, for those of you who like your Twitter, do get in touch and we'd love to interact on that. Thanks very much.